So, time to talk tanks. So the Eurofighter comes with these two tanks, as you can see them. They also give you in the hardware package these fuel fittings. So let's open those up and see what we got. So we got our fittings. So those will go into right there. It's pretty tight fit, I like that. Then you have your cap, which has got the rubber gasket, and that'll screw on to the fuel fitting, sort of like that. But what's also cool is that you have these screw-on barb fittings. Those will screw onto here, obviously, sort of like that. You need one for the fuel line, to which the clunk is going to attach to on the inside. This is your vent. It's probably going to go, I don't know, somewhere up here, or maybe, we'll see. And then fuel fittings. And you have two of those, right? So you have the second set. I wonder why I have an extra one of these guys. That's interesting. But yeah, and then you have your second set. Right. For the plumbing inside the tank, what I'm gonna use is Viton tubing, and this stuff is pretty wide, and obviously it's probably not gonna fit on the fuel fittings. You can see it's a pretty loose fit. So what I'm gonna have to do is double this up. So I'm gonna use some of this tubing just to get it fit on there, and then the Viton on top of it. The reason I like the Viton stuff is because it can stay in the tanks inside diesel without degrading. So that's gonna be the good stuff that we're gonna use in there. So first things first, as you can see, I've put the fuel fittings all the way in, and I'm obviously gonna take these out. But what I want to do is mark the perimeter around the fitting so that I know where I'm gonna sand, because I don't want to sand too much off of the tank, because that epoxy is really what's sealing the tanks. So I'm just gonna mark this so I know where to sand, because we want a nice good epoxy bond with this fuel fittings. Nice, perfect. There we go. Cool. So now we can see this is an area that needs to be sanded. Just very thin area here, just grounded so that I can glue everything together. You can see that I've ground out the tank on the left. The tank on the right is not ground out, but I'm gonna sand it out. So I'm gonna sand out, and remember, we just want to keep it in this area because that's where we're gonna apply epoxy, not anywhere else, because otherwise we're gonna get leaks through it. On the fuel fittings themselves, I've also, applied some grounding marks. You can see those in here, just so I can get something for that epoxy to bite onto that process. So here's my IPA. I'm just gonna sort of get it on there, and I like to use a clean microfiber cloth to just get that area nice and clean. I don't really need the markers anymore because I've sanded the spot that I needed, so I'm pretty confident that the glue is gonna go where it needs to go. So I think I've decided where I want my vents to go. They're gonna go on the top. X marks the spot right there. And so I'm just gonna drill through, measuring the size of the thread here. Looks like 5.89 millimeters. I happen to have a 7/32 drill bit. That's the closest I can get. And that 7/32 drill bit, this is this guy right here, is 5.52 millimeters. So it's just a little shy of what I want to use to drill. So we're gonna get that guy in there. We're gonna drill the holes. I like to do this very slowly. I don't want to crack the tank, so I just take my time and drill through this. Here we go. It's the first hole made right there. We're gonna do the second one as well, just nice and slowly, just like the first one. Here we go. All right, so we got both the holes there, and I'm just gonna test that they work. Yeah, so you can see that hole was just perfect so that I can get a nice seal on the threads for the vent, which is how I like to do it. And I'm just gonna work it in there. I like them tight like that because then when I apply the epoxy, I know that the epoxy is not gonna plug the hole that's gonna go in the tank. So that looks good there. I'm gonna work the other one in as well. Just nice and slow. Okay. So there's my vents. Again, I think that Sharpie was dead. Okay, there we go. And then on this guy. Alright, so we know we're gonna sand the inside of that just to get material off because we want our epoxy to stick really well. So for this I like to use my Dremel, just set it to a really low speed, and my bit, and just gently scratch the surface just like this. That looks good already. And that one looks good too. And then for good measure, we're just gonna scuff the bottom of the, just very slowly, very carefully. So yeah, this is how I do it. Just really slow, really gentle. And you have to be very careful because obviously a rotating tool can grasp and sort of get caught. So I just do it very slowly and very carefully. Alright, I'm happy with that. And so now, time to put these guys back in here. Gonna start screwing it just a little, just like that. We're gonna leave it sort of half done because I want to drop epoxy in there, and same goes for the second tank. Okay, so for this we're gonna be using E20NS, and I'm just gonna squirt a good amount in here. Oh, first of all I gotta clean this. Just forgot to clean that the spots I sanded, so I'm gonna do that right now. I just have a shop towel with IPA on it, and you can see it's doing a pretty good job of cleaning. I'm not gonna go ahead and apply our epoxy, so it's a nice good ring around this. Okay, just gonna get this guy to go down. Get the right angle for this. I think I want it right about there. And clean up my mess. So I'm pretty happy with that. I like to leave you know, the rounded edge of epoxy. I feel like it just makes me feel better about the seal that's been created. So we're gonna repeat the same on this guy. I'm being careful to not dislodge the vent that we just glued, so alright, so a nice bead of epoxy all around, and I'm just gonna smush this in. Just like that. Okay. And then just do some cleanup around this guy. Alright, so pretty happy with those. We're gonna let the epoxy do its job, cure overnight, and then we'll resume. So it's been about 24 hours and our tanks are dry. The epoxy is solid and looks like they're very clean. So I wound up just smoothing the edge around the main fuel fittings just to make it look, I don't know, a little more presentable. The tops I just left with a little bulge out. So next thing is gonna be tank testing, making sure that there's no leaks. Can't do that tonight, but for tonight what I think I'm gonna do is prepare the clunk lines and the internal plumbings of the tank. So we are gonna work on the tanks now, the internal plumbing of the tanks, and I'm gonna be using Viton tubing. And this stuff is pretty wide, as you can see. I think it's got like a 6mm internal diameter, so it's pretty wide. So for this style of tank, because it's pretty long this way, what I like to do is have a stint in the middle of brass, just like that, and then pad either side with just a little bit of Viton tubing. And the reason for that is obviously we don't want to kink our fuel line inside the tank. So I've started with a piece of brass tube that is about 100mm long, so roughly 100mm long, and I'm gonna add just the Viton to either side of it to make up the rest of it. So ideally what I like to do with this is that I want just a small amount of Viton on either side. That way it can also not bend itself or close itself on the Viton. So I'll get that done and then we'll come back. So I think I have the right length, and you can see the clunk is the shadow of it anyways. You can see that right here. It's just at the bottom, doesn't quite touch the bottom of the tank. You can hear that it kind of moves freely in there from the knocking sounds. And so I know that looking at the clunk almost at the tip right here, that's the perfect height, because I don't want the movement of the clunk restricting the total length of my setup there. So right after the fuel fitting all the way to the clunk is about 199mm. So this is what I set it up to be, and obviously this brass tube is 100mm. That means this red part is this green tube here, the Viton on either side is about 50 millimeters. So that's how I fit it. Next thing is going to be to wire wrap all of these connections. There's 3 connections, so the top here, that spot, this spot, and that spot, and then repeat that for the second tank. So I have wire wrapped my connections, so you can see that right at the barb, that's been wire wrapped 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. So that leaves this guy, which on this fitting just screws in. And what I like to do with these guys is just get some PTFE tape and just put a little around the thread, and then tighten it as much as tightly as I possibly can into the fuel fitting. So it'll look something like this. There we go. And then we're gonna screw that on, and then I'll clean off the rest of the PTFE, but that should be a pretty good solid connection, shouldn't come loose. I may decide to glue that later, but we'll see how that. So far it feels pretty solid. It's not gonna vibrate loose or anything. So that is the pickup line that's gonna go inside the tank. So that's PTFE treatment to the front here, and just tighten that down. I'm gonna tighten that with the wrench, and then we're gonna be done. We have the completed tank internals, and everything has been wire wrapped as expected, and obviously we have this brass tube in here so that this can't coil on itself and obstruct fuel flow. Second thing is these are exactly the same length in terms of the distance from the start of the intake tube all the way to the clunk. I think that I'm going to eventually run these tanks in series because they're fairly close together, and in my head at least that gives me the best chance of not having air bubbles. Essentially the intake from this tank is going to go to the vent of this guy. The intake from this is going to go to the UAT. The vent of this is going to go to the outside. So we are going to go ahead and pressure test our tanks, or leak test them. And for this, what I'm going to do is blow into whichever tube here and clamp the other one first. So that's just going to get some pressure into the tank, or some air into the tank, make sure everything is really tight. Blown some air just using our mouths, nothing too intense, and the tank feels nice and solid. So we're gonna dunk it and see if we get any air bubbles. Okay, so that looks perfectly solid. I'm just gonna flip it around to see if there's anything that we're missing on the bottom. Nope. And then so we don't think we have any pinholes in there, and let's hear if we can release that. There we go. So tank 1 has passed the test. So the second tank checked out, no bubbles. So both tanks are good. We're gonna just go figure out how we want them mounted in the jet and continue with the plumbing, exterior plumbing that is. Now that the tanks have been proven to be pinhole free, the next thing is to use my isopropyl, and I'm going to dump a whole amount of it in here and just swish it out. I already did this initially before I epoxied the fittings, but the tanks are pretty clean, but I just like to do this once more and really make sure that that tank or both tanks are clean. So we'll do that, and we'll just swish this around and eventually dump that IPA out of the tank before we continue to mount them in the jet. So we are working on mounting the tanks inside the jet. As you can see, I already have one sitting in there, and I'm going to go through my thought process of how I mounted these. So as I look at these tanks, I figure that I have two problems. One is, how do I mount the tanks so that they are removable and so that that mechanism is light? I don't want to add a pound of weight by adding something sophisticated to the mounting rail of the tanks. And number two is, where do I place the tanks? Because in this jet, the tanks sit right around this area, but you have you can have about an inch of movement back and forth. And I think that's important because of CG. Well, I'm building the jet now. I don't know where stuff is gonna wind up sitting at. So the second problem is, this system has to allow me to move the tanks as much as I can to get the CG correct. I put 2 strips of Velcro on the bottom, and obviously before you do this, you want to clean that surface with IPA or something to make sure it's perfectly clean. And so the tanks look like this. Let's go into the jet and show you what that looks like. Alright, so let's get this air brake wire out of the way here. If we can. So you see that this actually has enough headroom between the top and the bottom to install a second tank even with the first tank in place. And this is one of the things I'm looking for, because I want a system that's going to be easy to put things in and take them out. So here we go. Go into the front here to lift the tank up. And you can see that headroom that I was talking about. So right now I can just lift my tank and sort of maneuver it into place. There we go. And then once I'm happy, it's not grabbing any Velcro just yet, then I can set it down wherever I want. I can lift and position the tank as I need. I think that one's gonna go down there. Perfect. And so just like that, the tank is in place. And you see, it wasn't too much of a hassle to get the tank in with the other one in. So this solution works really well. What I'm gonna focus on is the vent. I found that this jet's a little bit difficult to figure out where the vent goes, because whereas it seems like there's a lot of room over here, a lot of that space is very difficult to access from inside the jet. So what I usually like to do is put the vent somewhere in the front, right close to the leading edge of the wing. That way it's easy to plug in a taxi tank or unplug it. But in this case, if you look at the ledges here, they're very tight, they're just very thin, but also there's not enough room to actually bend that vent line in this area right here. It's just very tight. So what I decided to do is actually come back here, because there's a former that goes right in here like that, and some carbon fiber that accompanies that. So with that, there's access holes to actually reach it with my fingers from the inside of the jet, and I'll show that. And it's closer to, in this case, the left side of the jet, way far into the wing, but that's okay. I don't really have a choice. So I'm using the DreamWorks vent system, and that's what this guy is. And let's go and see what it looks like on the inside. Right, so on the inside there, you can see the vent plug, the vent fitting right there. And what I added is this piece of wood here, because the nut that's gonna go on top of the vent to secure the vent in place, I want that to actually have a larger surface area to grab onto. And you can see there's a little bit of carbon fiber, but my vent is also sitting on the side where there's just some air X. So that's why that piece of wood is there, just to provide some extra surface area. So we're going to screw that down, and the vent line is going to come up through here and go to the tank that's going to be on the left side of the aircraft right here. Again, my tank setup is series, so we're going to go from the vent down here to the vent on the tank number 1, which is on the left side. The pickup of tank number 1 is going to go to the vent of tank number 2, and the pickup of tank number 2 is then going to go to the UAV. Vent is finally in place. This is what it looks like from the inside. That piece of wood has been CA'd to the frame just to keep it in place, but can come out if I need to. The bottom side looks like. So I like the vent system, pretty clean, more towards the left, so I can hopefully plug in a taxi tank by sitting it on the left wing and getting under there. Seems to work pretty well. So I've mounted them as far back as I can because I'm suspecting that keep weight far back as possible. Dylan in the garage. Say hi, baby.
Hi, baby.
There we go. Always helping daddy in the garage. So here's where we're at. Keep going on.